What is up, guys? It is Saint, and we are back with Saint Talks number 8. It's been a while, but I thought I'd bring it back, and talk about some stuff that I thought the community should, get some insight on. I thought I'd share my insight on a situation that's been going on recently. Now, before I start this conversation, I do want to preface that some people are probably going to be upset about the contents of this video. Some people will feel like I'm, personally calling them out. I'm not trying to. I think that a lot of reasons things don't work out or things aren't successful is through a combination of factors, and some of them are not in your hands. That being said, I do think that it's important that we touch on certain basics, and unfortunately, I mean, you might be offended. And the thing I do want to touch on is team tours. Now, not major team tours like the DPL or the TDT or whatever. I want to touch on the smaller team tours such as PWS and the Gauntlet, which both have come with their, I guess, elements of controversy recently. So without further ado, let's talk about these team tours and give us a little bit of background. So we'll start with the Gauntlet because that's a little farther back. The Gauntlet was a team tour that was designed by Pokemon Trainer Orange, and the premise of the team tour was to give newer players an opportunity to play in a team tour environment. And as a result, they chose to ban all DPL and COK caliber coaches or players from participating in the tour. And it was just a team tour designed to be small for lesser known players and give some people an insight as to what a team tour is like, and give them some introduction and help them, I guess, get introduced to the community. Unfortunately, the Gauntlet didn't work out so well. Unfortunately, it just died before week 1 ended through a multitude of factors, and some of those factors I will discuss in this video. And I'll also give some context about PWS now. Disclaimer, PWS is not dead, contrasting to the caption that this video is going to be. It's not dead. That being said, I do want to talk about it as well because I feel like there is a lot of shortcomings about the tour that should be addressed, and we can use those as guidelines for anyone that wants to run a team tour because I feel like right now the people that are beginning to endeavor into running the team tour for the first time don't really understand what they're going into and how to execute the idea as well as they should be. So the first thing that I think we should clear up is toxicity in a team tour. People that run team tours need to understand that to run a team tour is to invite or not invite, but it's to attract a certain type of audience. You attract an audience that is more geared towards competitive play, and I guess ship hosting is part of that too. I think that a lot of lesser known communities or smaller communities have an emphasis on being more wholesome and reducing the amount of toxicity, whereas in the higher echelon draft leagues there isn't as much of a grasp on that. Not like the it is still monitored, but it isn't it isn't policed the same way. And for a lot of newer team tours, I think that's one of the problems that pops up, is that people don't understand that when you are a lesser, when your audience, your usual audience, the players that usually play in your draft league or interact with you are usually so wholesome in a sense that when you're introducing a team tour, you invite all of those different elements that you can control, all these different people, and you basically invite them to participate in this event. And you have to be prepared for the turnout. And I don't want to say that the people that you attract are all toxic. That's not true at all. But they definitely bring a different, I guess, a different, it's just something different, right? Because they're very likely to be more shitposty and casual, because they're playing with less experienced players. They're very likely to meme around a bit, try to bend the rules, and just have fun. Like they're not really looking for the competition. That's not what they're there for. They're there to just play with their friends, get drafted, mess around, do well, and hopefully win with their team. That's usually with the goal. Especially this problem, I feel like this isn't really a problem until you no longer understand how to adapt to it. I feel like right now the issue with lower team tours is that there's not really enough of a balance between what's shitposting and what's not. Because just because somebody's shitposting or fucking around does not mean that they're necessarily being toxic. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're not either. People need to be more, I guess, open to the concept that a team tour will introduce something different, and you have to live with that a little bit. It's not to say that there's not a line that shouldn't be crossed. There's 100% a line. You have to keep them from crossing the line, no matter where you deem the line to be. But you also have to, like I keep repeating, be willing to accept that the line can get blurred here and there. There are certain parts where it's too much, and certain parts where it's probably still acceptable, and you just kind of have to live with it. Number 2, your moderation team needs to be solid. I feel like right now, when I look at these team tours, I see a lot of questionable decisions, especially in the Gauntlet, which is the one I failed. The moderation team didn't seem to me, from an outsider's point of view, like it was built for success. And there were people that were moderating the tour that went as far as to say, not just PTO himself. Like I do understand that this is kind of me calling out PTO. I don't mean it like that, but but there were people on that staff team that I talked to personally, aside from just PTO, that also shared their sentiments about the tour, that it wasn't run well and that they didn't really know what was going on. It wasn't just one person, but there were people that didn't understand the direction of the tour. They didn't understand how things were run, the decision making. There were certain decisions that were very confusing, such as the Will originally not being allowed to play and then him being allowed to play again, such as doing the auction with the 69k Ironclass or whatever. There was a bunch of questionable decisions, and they were never really addressed. There was no unity as a mod team to come to a consensus and fix these problems. And when the people that were participating in the tour or spectating went about asking about, this clarity, we wanted clarity. We wanted like a real ruling. We want to know, is this legal? Is this not legal? What's going on? I felt like there wasn't a lot of transparency between the people running the tour and the people playing in the tour. And when you don't have that clear-cut level of communication and understanding, like when your team is not united, it's going to fail. Even in DPO, right, we had the illegal Gliscor situation where different members of the staff had different opinions on which version of Gliscor was allowed. Was it the version with Power Whip from the old DLC that proved to be like an illegal set, or was it banned? Like there was a difference, between certain members about like what the opinion was, and because that caused a lot of confusion. And for a little stretch, it wasn't obviously anywhere near the level of the chaotic state of the Gauntlet, but it created some confusion, and some teams got fucked up because of it. Like it just wasn't, it just wasn't as smooth as it could have been if there was more transparency. If people had more communication amongst each other and were all clear on the rules. Same thing with PWS. Now, I'm not in PWS, and I can't pretend that I really follow it alone. But to say the least, PWS has been up and down, right? There's been a lot of issues with the tour that I think everybody, both playing in it, moderating it, and just spectating it, can all agree on. That it's, quite frankly, been extremely chaotic. And I think that part of the issue is that we're having the people that are having an issue with the tour are upset for X and O reason, and the moderation team isn't really like, they're not really acknowledging X and O problem, and unfortunately, that's causing a bit of a rift between the players and the staff. And because of it, eventually it escalated to the point where, as people might know, there was a huge uproar and a lot of people chose to leave the tour. And I think it's unfair to say that there's a right, like either side was in the right, because obviously you have the players who basically canceled off the team, canceled off the tour because they felt like they were wronged, and you have the staff that felt like they got cancelled against because they made a decision that they felt was right, and and it had a very, I think, negative. It just caused a whole very negative vibe, but there wasn't, I think, enough transparency between the staff and the people, because for a lot of us, we didn't know what was going on. The drama was really between a specific team and the mod team. Nobody else really knew the details, and nobody was willing to, or nobody had access to those details. There was no transparency, and because there wasn't that transparency, it became hard to continue to have the same level of commitment to the tour that maybe if there was a little more communication and a little more civil conversation, that wouldn't have been an issue. It just wasn't there because of, because the staff were set on their ways there and the players were set on their ways there, and there was just a gap in the middle, and then that gap was never fixed. So when more problems got exposed, when more problems got thrown into the mix, it just fell apart. And that brings me, I guess, to another point that I'm going to make, and this part is probably going to make some people very upset, but people have to take more accountability when they are running team tours. Unfortunately, I personally don't have much of an opinion on Gauntlet or PWS myself. I personally don't think of them as anything too special. To me, they're just team tours that existed. Like, they exist, but I'm not personally part of it, and I personally am not particularly attached to it. But when a problem arises, right, no matter what it's in, a tour, a league, you don't have to be this, there's always somebody that's at the top of the ladder. And unfortunately, when things go wrong, that person is the one to blame. Even myself or Hiker or Has or anyone who runs a draft league of our own, when we make a mistake, like in our own draft leagues, the blame comes to the person in charge at the top of the ladder. It might not be necessarily because we as individuals fucked up, but because we run the communities we do, the blame at the end of the day falls upon us because it was an issue in our servers, and it happened, and that's completely fine. I can't pretend that I haven't made a lot of mistakes running my own servers and my own leagues and just stuff in general. I have made a lot of mistakes, but instead of pushing them aside, or I guess being in a state of denial about it, because I think I accept it and I move on. I look upon it as something that we can improve on every season. Let's use Trick House, for example. I talked about it previously in one of my Saint Talks videos, my first one, about how Trick House had a lack of identity. They tried to expand too quickly, and at the end of the day, they just weren't suited to become a league that they tried to be. Like they weren't suited for the ambition that they had. But the owners of the Trick House got together. They had a talk. They decided as a group that they were not going to let the same problems from their first season continue to hinder them. And here they are now in season 3. They've just secured a sports partnership. They have finished their second big tour, and they're on the uprise. They're rising up in the ranks of the community because they've looked on those little things. They admitted that they've made mistakes, and they're moving on from it with a positive direction. as owners of team tours, you are going to be criticized, or just tours in general, or leagues. You're going to be criticized for a lot of the decisions you make because you can't appease everyone. What you can do is learn to work with those mistakes and, you know, accept them and fix them for future. I don't know the details or intricacies behind either of these tours. I can't claim that I'm an expert in any way. But I do know that I feel like there is an element of trying to maintain this image that there are no integral issues, because especially in the PWS, I feel like when the uproar happened, it became instantly a case of damage control versus, I understand, we made a mistake, let's move on. I think that if this like chat room of sorts was just revealed, weeks and weeks ahead, instead of waiting so long and waiting for like an entire server to do an uprising, and it was just talked about when the problem first arose, then I think there would have been more communication between the staff to maybe re-examine that decision, and then the players would have been more appeased, and then they could have moved on. And the reality is that they never moved on, really, right? That's why so many players left the tour. And it's just unfortunate, right? Because nobody wants to see a tour do badly. I don't think anyone intentionally goes out of their way to make a tour or make a server fail, like not do well. I don't think that people usually go out of their way to do that. Maybe a few people, but for the most part, the majority of the community wants other members of the community to be successful. But to be successful, you have to acknowledge that sometimes, the decisions you make are wrong, and you need to understand that there needs to be more of a conversation and to resolve those problems that have arose previously, and resolve them so that you can move on and improve at the end of the day, because it's all a learning experience. Like, I don't want to say that like anyone's gotten to the point in the community, whether like I think that every draft owner or owner of every league server didn't get to where they are like on the first day. They all like slowly gradually learned and like they faced their own challenges, and they learned how to adapt to those challenges, and that's why they are where they are now. That same logic applies to team tours. So you just have to kind of live with those challenges and move on. But you can't live in a state of denial and pretend that there aren't issues, because that's when the public perception changes, and that's when your server starts to fall apart. When the people playing in your tour have given up on you as a staff to run the tour, then the level of your tour starts falling off very hard. And I'm not saying that Gauntlet obviously already fell apart because, when faced with criticism, they just collapsed. And, I think that was a poor decision on their part, because it gives such a bad look overall for the community when a tour designed for like newer players just collapses the way it does. But, PWS is still persevering. And I don't mean to criticize the people in PWS. Like, I know that what I've been saying can be a little bit harsh for certain people. I truly do not mean to criticize any one individual, because I think that overall the reasons why PWS struggled this season it isn't really because of any one individual. I think it's because a bunch of unfortunate events kept happening, and then it just escalated to the point where the tour is where it is now. Obviously, it's still going on, and there are still people playing in it, and there are still games, and then it looks like it's still going to persevere to the end of the season. But I mean, it obviously has struggled quite a bit. I'm not trying to criticize any one individual, but there needs to be a discussion about what's acceptable and what's not, and how to progress. Because I feel like a lot of decisions were maybe made with a little bit too much haste, and just weren't discussed enough to the point where we got the drama that ended up happening. And we'll move on. then I suppose the last thing, or maybe not last thing, but the next thing that comes to mind is that unfortunately, some people are not ready to run big events. A team tour is a massive event. You have usually a minimum of 8 teams, 2 captains per team, so that's already 16 people. Assuming that you have a normal mod staff of, let's say, 6 or 7, then you get 22, 23 people, and assuming you get 7 players a team, that's another like 42 players. I don't know what, I'm not going to do the math and count it up, but let's just say, at least from the playing perspective, you get like 60 something people, 70 something people, and then you get like another something, however many spectators. That's a lot of responsibility to handle, and unfortunately some people just aren't ready for that responsibility. You know, some people, I think, aren't ready to face the reality of the community, which is that not everybody is going to behave in the way you want them to be, and then because it's a tour, there's an added element of competitiveness, and that just brings out the worst in people. I think that a lot of people will agree that team tours bring out the worst in a lot of people, because everybody just nobody wants to let their team down. Everybody wants to fight against the best players, and it just creates like this added competition. And then when we're talking about these lower team tours too, especially, then you also have the element of people just wanting to fuck around in the tour, because the people running it, maybe they're not perceived the best. Maybe they're not like seen as the best people to run the tour, or maybe they're not seen as people to like respect for those individuals that are trying to cause harm, or not harm, but just fuck around, and they just induce chaos. There are just tours that, like, when you introduce such a big concept such as a team tour, you're unfortunately taking on a huge responsibility, to say the least, because this event not only reflects on all, let's say, maybe 100 people that are going to be involved in the process throughout the season. It also reflects on yourself and your mod team, as individuals, as like people, because a team tour is very publicized, and your league might not be. Like, a team tours are always talk of the town. Like, every time a new team tour starts up, I feel like every community that I'm in starts discussing it to some degree. And if those team tours aren't run by people that are overall respected by the community, then I think it's a really rough look. I think somebody said, I don't remember where, that the Gauntlet was perceived as the Pokemon Trainer Orange team tour, and I think I agree with that. Unfortunately, poor guy PTO, like, it just kind of sucks, right? Because I think PTO has really good intentions. Like, I don't think he tries to, like, I think he's trying to make the most out of really good ideas. I think the idea of the Gauntlet, the concept of it, is very smart. Like, give new people a chance to shine. But because, unfortunately PTO has a bit of a reputation amongst the community, it just didn't look good. And then because of it introduced maybe like a bad crowd that just wanted to fuck around, and the tour was doomed to start. Like, even with all the internal issues with the server that I'm sure everybody knows of, the tour was doomed. And then with PWS, or even like UCA, right? There was a lot of internal issues with it, and the people running it, not saying that they didn't try their best or aren't trying their best, but because it's recognized as a lower team tour per se, like, the reality is that I think there's always a bit of a negative stigma that comes with it, and maybe it's a little unfair, maybe it's a little fucked, but the reality is that some people are just going to be more inclined to fuck around, and a lot of that, at the end of the day, comes back to who's running the tour. When we have like certain draft leagues or like draft ideas, a lot of great have been run by people that weren't ready for the pressure yet. A few years ago, there was this idea called the best ever rest, and that was an idea came up by King Clyde, who used to go by Jesus, and it introduced a lot of great players from all around the community, and to play in this one league, where like the best players. But nobody cared because unfortunately at the time Clyde had a very negative reputation, and the server just fell apart kind of, with because Clyde had a bit of a meltdown, and the server just completely collapsed, and it was just a series of bad events. And then you had stuff like the League War tours, but that were hosted by Clyde at first. Those didn't go so well either, for the most part. Those weren't too successful. Let's talk about like even PGP season 2, which happened, I think I'd say like 6 months after the original PGP got cancelled the week before it was going to start. That caused a lot of leagues to no longer have the interest in participating, because they felt like, I think, that they couldn't, I guess, trust the staff anymore. They no longer had the trust or the respect for the tour itself, to merit participation in it. Unfortunately, people have reputations in the community. People have different like statures in the community, and some people are just not ready at the time to run these events. Now, I'm not saying to not try and branch out and do these tours and events. Like, they're great ideas, and they deserve to be run because they're great ideas. But I think that a major issue is that those people with the great ideas don't necessarily understand the pressure that comes with it, the responsibility, the challenges they'll face, and the result, when all of those elements come flying in, these events just fall apart. And it's just very unfortunate, because I think that the draft community overall, like especially in the lesser known communities, people come up with some really great, fantastic ideas, but because the ideas are run by people that don't really understand what they're going into, they just get looked down upon, and the tour just starts falling apart slowly but gradually, and the tour or the idea just falls apart, and it just goes poorly. It just doesn't come to fruition as the same way that it was intended to. And I think a way we can address that is reach out to the people that are higher up in the community per se. People are, for the most part, people are very willing to talk as long as you just ask them for advice, and people are willing to help you if you ask for help, like no matter who you are. I know for a fact that like dozens and dozens of people have come to me for help, whether it be with drafting, with running a server, with all that. I know that Gregulator is also super responsive. Like he like when people ask him for help, he'll always come up with great like advice. Some people like there are a lot of people that have been here before, and we've done difficult things. We've run difficult events, and we've done it before because we've been around for so long. Reaching out for help and getting advice, and then having them come on board, helping you out. That changes the narrative. Like, the Gauntlet run by PTO is, realistically speaking, going to be very different than the Gauntlet run by Gregulator. It creates there's a whole different like stigma to it, just based on who's running it and who's involved in the process. Get those people with higher, like more experience and more understanding of what they're doing to back you on your idea and give support, and don't attempt to just go in yourself with the people you trust directly, because unfortunately, sometimes they just don't understand, I think, what they're going into. They just aren't prepared for it. Ask for help, and help will be given majority of the time. I suppose I'll wrap it up then by just saying, once again, I do not mean to offend PTO or Rousseau or really anyone else that's involved in either of these events or anything that I've mentioned in this, I guess, fairly aggressive rant, you could call it that. But I think that as a whole, like if we're going to continue to run these tours, and for the communities that are lesser known, they need to be done better, because a big reason why Draft League is, declining as a format is because we aren't as appealing to play as other formats, because people come into the community, they don't really have anywhere to go, so they're starting in like lesser, poorer run places, and then they come into like an event like this and it just falls to pieces, and then they just get turned away from the prospect of it because they look at opponent and it's like, why would I play in draft? These events are run like shit. Like, why would I give a fuck? I truly think that this video is designed, I think, to help people that are, for future trying to run like big community events like team tours or just regular tours or whatever, understand that there's a lot that goes into it, and if you're not ready for everything that's coming your way, it's very easy to crumble under the pressure, and it's really unfortunate, but it's the reality. Be informed about what you're going into and be prepared, to face backlash, because not everything you do or decide on is going to be appealing to the public. Like, you have to you have to accept that sometimes you'll fuck up, and you don't have to continue to maintain this image of perfection, because reality is, the more you pretend that you are doing things right, or the more you try to push the blame away from yourself and continue to run events like they're being done perfectly, the more likely it is that people refuse to come back and play in these events again. Well, with that in mind, I suppose that's it for this video. Thanks again to Star for helping record this video. Thank you to Has, in particular. He and I had a lot of conversations, I think, that were very similar to this particular topic. Thank you to Stumbles, who helped me, I guess, figure out how to word some of the stuff I addressed in this video. And thank you, if you're still here, for listening to me go on this, I think, very different Saint talk than all of my previous ones. Yeah. And with that being said, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you were interested in this video or you want to see more. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.